Check 1, 2. I think we sound all right. No, we do not. Let me fix that. We should sound much better now. And that we do. So we have made it through the 2. We have made it through the 4. And now we are on to the 6 of this 246W challenge. BM246W challenge. 3 different styles of race car, 3 different classes of race car. Started this season with the M2 Club Sport TCX car, then we moved on to the M4 GT4, the first generation that we have in here. And now we are on to the M6 GT3. Not the GT3 that most people would choose to run. Most people would be choosing the newer M4 GT3, but here we are in the M6 GT3. And it's going to be a wet one here at Suzuka. It is going to be a 1-hour race from here to the end, or from the start to the end. Qualifying is going to be very crucial here. Currently the rain not too bad, the spray not too bad. But when it comes to this race start and the majority of the field altogether in one spot, it is going to be very hard to see. Already going to be difficult to find traction out here. Suzuka, for some people, hard to find traction in the dry. It's going to be even harder to do so here in the wet, and a lot of the curves that you would try to use during the dry, you are not going to want to be anywhere near here in the wet, especially through the S's. Very tricky section here in the wet. Also, the kinks of what are the Degners, Degner 1 and 2. And then the hairpin as well as 200R, 130R here in the wet, going to be very tricky. A lot harder to chuck the car in when you're dealing with wet track and wet tires. Also, another thing to be looking out for, there is not a required stop, so we will likely see people go the distance on these wet tires. 1 hour on the wets, which is typically longer than a lot of people go. We do have a chance for some variation in the weather, so we may very well see some wet to dry conditions, possibly starting dry to wet, starting wet to dry. Maybe a dry patch in the middle of the race with some wet at the end. There is only really one way to know, and that's to be in the racing session when we get started. And around goes Douglas as Horner actually bests the time. A 2:12.3, nowhere near the 2-minute lap times that you would be looking at here in the dry. And Horner with the floodlights on, as we have a couple minutes left in this practice session. We already see Horner with the top time on the board at 2:12.3, but still struggling to find traction coming out of the S's. Down through Degner 1 and 2. Still just struggling for grip. Those curves can be used on the outside, at least in the dry, but very hard to do so in the wet. And that curve before you come into the hairpin, very treacherous. A lot of drivers like to use it, especially the curve on the outside. Suzuka already hard enough to pass, and we're about to make this track a lot more narrow. Some of the places that you may try 2x2, likely unable to do so here in these wet conditions. And who is that just behind? That's number 45 of Lindbergh doing a four-wheel slide coming around Spoon Curve. Just pitching the car to the side, and the tires did not have any sort of grip at all, and around the car went. Wagner, 2:11.9 currently the time to beat in practice. Coming through 200R. Down the hill towards Spoon. Spoon seems to be a very tricky section of track, trying to get the car to rotate nicely into the turn, but too much rotation, especially here in the wet, very hard to stop. It's also being an older chassis, many of the drivers likely not too accustomed to the driving nuances of this M6 compared to the M4 or other front engine rear wheel drive variants. And across the line with not enough time to start another lap, we will have an end to this practice session. Not quite the full breadth of the grid that we would usually see or that we have seen in previous weeks, likely due to the inclement weather and some of the real-life inclement weather affecting a few of our drivers with Hurricane Helene. Joseph making a return to TRC, currently P2, looking to have a good run and maybe upset the championship tonight. Horner and Douglas, both P3 and P4, at least at the end of practice. We are about ready to get kicked over to qualifying, and Vasquez out there with the Bilstein colors on that M6. Running towards 130R. And two tires on the outside curb, not much grip out there. I don't know if he stayed valid on this lap, but we'll try to bring it home and at least put a time up on the board. Will not have enough time. So 15-minute qualifying, and the grid is set for now, ready to go. Who is first out of the pit lane? I want to say that may have been Douglas. Yes, that was Douglas, first out of the pit lane to start this qualifying session. And who is that right behind? Is that Lindbergh? No, it seems to be, actually, yes, that is Lindbergh. Thought that may have been the teammate of Heiderstad, but no, that is Lindbergh out just behind Douglas as they will try to get out into that clean track position. Try to get these wet tires warmed up as much as possible, warm those brakes up as much as possible. This moisture will make it difficult, at least if you have the wrong tune. Brake ducts front and rear closed up to hold some of that temperature in, as well as pressures up on these wet tires. And strategy, a bit of an open call, some wild card strategy if you will. There is no required strategy, no required pit stops, and I think we will see some people go the distance, not pitting for tires, not taking fuel, or we could see some splash and dash for fuel. There is no required stop. No mandatory anything with the pit lane. You don't have to go in if you want to just put a full tank of fuel and run it as far as you can go. Likely need to make sure that you've done the calculations in terms of doing that strategy. But if it is viable, all power to you to go ahead with it. Douglas out of Spoon, running up the hill towards 130R. Will try to get a lap started here. 130R going to be absolutely treacherous, as Heiderstadt just behind, I think, went a little wide, but did not lose control of the car over the curbs. And very wet here at Suzuka. We do see on the forecast that rain would be going away, but it is not going to be doing so fast enough. Across the line, Douglas will start the first official times of this qualifying session. So we'll see what Douglas is able to bring on this first lap. Just behind, we do have the 45 of Lindbergh, the 109 of Heiderstadt, and the 99 of Wagner. Now there is a battle for this championship, and after the last round, the previous round, I believe it is pretty close. There is also a battle for the Holy Grail Championship that I believe Heiderstadt is winning. There is half a point between Lindbergh and Douglas, and they need to do quite a bit of work to try and catch up to Wagner. 3 races left in this series, including this one tonight, and it's must-win situations for Douglas and Lindbergh. They need to do whatever they can to pull whatever points away from Wagner they can, who is just behind these two. Half a point currently between Lindbergh and Douglas heading into tonight. Currently sitting P2 and P3, and aside from that top 3, there is really no one to touch them when it comes to the championship fight. They have been here every round, and they have put in the time, put in the dedication to bring home those high point scoring positions. As Douglas comes around Spoon curve, does have the number 36 of Camber up ahead, a Holy Grail rookie driver. Through 130R, Douglas pushing but keeping it within the track limits, maybe a little bit off that throttle coming through 130R into the Casio chicane, which does round out this lap. We'll see what the time to beat from Douglas is. 2:11.9 was the best that we saw from Wagner in free practice. What are we looking at in qualifying? Starting line just at the halfway point of the straight at 2:11.5 from Douglas. What are they going to bring behind Lindbergh? 0.8 behind. Wagner not on a valid lap. Heiderstadt not on a valid lap. Joseph, the number 92, P1 at 2:11.480, and wanting to throw a wrench in this championship fight. Making his first appearance in this championship tonight. Norman up into P4, Rowan P5 currently. And Douglas, I believe, making a mistake at Degner 2. We'll have to try to continue to improve. Joseph, the number 92, all blacked out M6 GT3, currently top of the timing boards coming through Degner 2. I can tell you right now that matte black M6 is going to be hard to see cutting through the spray just behind you. Hopefully, the race engineer would tell you where those cars are around you. Currently, Joseph with the time to beat. Horner now splitting the difference between Douglas and Joseph, just 0.02 of a second quicker than Douglas. see what they can bring. Is Douglas on a quicker lap here, or is it going to be another try? That's invalid there. This will not be an improvement, but good enough to go ahead and try again. Douglas shaved a few more thousandths of a second, quite a few more thousandths, but not enough thousandths. Up to P2, knocking Horner down a peg, but Wagner at 2:11.1. Now the time to beat, and I think we are going to be in the 2-minute 10s, as it seems to be some more waters being displaced from the track, and we may see the times coming down. I think we are beginning to see the wet line develop. Yes, we are. And Wagner asserting dominance in this qualifying session, saying there is no one out there who can challenge me in terms of this championship. And I believe that was a 92 of Douglas, no, or of Joseph, but no, that was the 109 of Heiderstadt off at Dunlop Curve. Joseph currently P2, Douglas currently P3. The difference between Joseph and Douglas, only 17 thousandths of a second. We'll see if they will be able to improve. Heiderstadt currently on pole position in the Holy Grail Series, with Atwell currently in P2, just a quarter of a second behind. Wagner through 130R will get another chance to improve on his lap time. And out of the final corner onto the pit straight, Douglas with a 2:10.9, first into the 2-minute 10s. And Wagner with work to do. Wagner has already done that work at 2:10.4. Are we going to drop into the 9s? It only took one lap to go from 2:11s to 2:10s. Are we going to see 2-minute 9s? And are we just going to be looking for times to continue dropping all the way to the end of this qualifying session? We may very well see that be the case. And if so, there is not going to be much room to come into the pit lane. If you're going to do so, you would need to now have a couple laps of fuel in the car to cross that line and set a late of a lap as possible to ensure that you have the optimum track that you are going to be dealing with. We are cruising towards the end of this championship. Just 2 more races to go past this one. And the fight for the championship is nowhere near complete. Wagner does have a good lead. Both Douglas and Lindbergh fighting for positions. Actually, both half a point between each other on the podium. And Wagner toying with that outside curb. We are seeing a lot of drivers using that outside curb. It does seem to be giving a little bit of slip to the car, allowing some rotation, but typically in these wet conditions, those raised curbs are not quite what you want to use. You can use them a little bit and wide from Wagner again. That is going to be another invalid lap. We'll have 2 more opportunities to improve. Currently Wagner with a half-second buffer to Douglas in terms of times so far, but we'll see if anyone is able to compete with the times that Wagner and Douglas have put on the board. Horner currently P3, and as Heiderstadt and Joseph come across the line behind, Joseph up into P3, Less than a tenth of a second behind the time set by Douglas, but still no competition for Wagner. Half a second lead on the field. And trying to hold the car steady. I can't tell if this is a push lap or not from Wagner through the S's and eventually around the very long uphill Dunlop curve. Downhill into Degner 1 and 2. Does seem to be pushing that car a four-wheel slide into Degner 1, using a lot of the curb through 2 and holding it out very wide to the outside through Degner 2 into the hairpin. Power being very conservative on that power, likely going to be a very beneficial virtue coming out of that hairpin. The majority of the field has set a lap time, as we will have 19 drivers on the grid, with 5 of our Holy Grail entries here tonight. Wagner still yet to be beaten, heading towards the line to try to get another lap, buy some more insurance. Lindbergh slicing the gap between the leaders, now 3.6 tenths behind Wagner. Wagner will try to improve on this lap, and if not, we'll have one more lap to try and improve some more. Is there going to be anyone to try to best Wagner? Douglas will not. A practice pit stop for Douglas, but their qualifying session will be over. A 2:10.02 for Wagner, and that puts a 3/4 of a second lead on the rest of the field. Is there going to be anyone able to respond? Through Degner 1 and 2, Lindbergh needs to make it back to the start-finish line before that time is up. I think he may barely have enough time to do so. Needs to push Joseph on their final lap. Douglas will not be able to improve. Horner just started their final lap. Needs a second. The majority of the field needs a second. But Lindbergh will be the first to contest. Wagner, I don't know if he's going to be on another lap, and Lindbergh too hard on the brakes into Spoon, losing the car, and that is going to invalidate the lap time, and Lindbergh will not be improving on this lap. That knocks Lindbergh out of the equation, P2 and no better, but we'll see if anyone able to knock him down a peg. Number 103 of Bird, quite a few seconds off the pace, but we'll see if he brings in improvement, as he will be the first to cross the finish line, I believe, on a valid lap. Lindbergh into the pit lane. The 16 of Mikey into the pit lane. And out of the final corner, Bird trying to scrape whatever pace he can coming out and across the start-finish line. Is it going to be an improvement for Bird? Will it be enough? P9 for Bird will not be able to improve. Wagner, does he have some extra time held in his pocket, or is he done? Stays out, will cross the line, may have an improvement. I think he really wants to see the 209. We'll see if he does. Flashing the lights as he comes across the line. Is it a 209? It is not an improvement. A 2:10.02, the time to beat. Joseph will not bring an improvement into the pit lane. Vasquez out of the Casio chicane and across the line. Is it going to be an improvement? Holding straight, not bearing to the inside. It's good enough for P2 and 0.06 of a second being the difference. Horner needing a second, looking for an improvement. Any improvement would be good for Horner. What is it going to be? P4 for Horner as he comes across the line. The number 23 of Young coming out of the final corner will be the final car to cross the line in this qualifying session. Will it be an improvement? Just needs a tenth or so, and does not find that 10th. P13 for Young. So how are we looking tonight? Wagner, P1 Vasquez P2, Lindbergh P3, Horner P4, Douglas P5, Joseph P6, Wilson P7, Mikey P8, Bird P9, Heiderstop P10, Atwell P11, Rowan P12, Young P13, Norman P14, Drain P15, Merkel P16, Trotman Grant P17, Camber P18, and Granados P19. And in the Holy Grail Series, Heiderstop P1, Atwell P2, Trotman Grant P3, Camber P4, and Granados P5. That brings it into qualifying. Wagner on the pole, the man to beat, has been for the majority of this season and does have a sizable lead in the championship, but not a lead that is hard to dissolve away. A poor finish tonight and a good finish from either Douglas or Lindbergh closes up that championship fight by quite a lot. We'll see what they are able to bring, just awaiting the transition over to the race session. And thank you all for tuning in. If you are not following, I would greatly appreciate it if you would hit that follow button on the Twitch channel. Just 3 followers away from 400 followers. And also, if you wouldn't mind subscribing, you can use a free Twitch Prime subscription if you have Amazon Prime. Or if you would like to support the stream monetarily, you can do so with a regular Twitch Prime or just a regular Twitch subscription. Also, follow the YouTube channel. We are approaching 100 subscribers on the YouTube channel. And while I do not have a YouTube stream running concurrent to this one right now, the race will be uploaded to the YouTube channel post-race, likely tomorrow morning. We are now set on the grid and ready to go. Wagner ready to take this field. We have a 1-hour race today, no mandatory stops, so we may very well see some no stop from here to the end. I can only imagine that carnage with the rain and some lap 1 incidents will send some drivers to the pit lane, or at least give them some damage that may need to be repaired whenever they, and if they do decide to come into the pit lane and take a pit stop. But as of right now, everything clean and good to go. The rain is falling. The track is thoroughly wet. Will take a lap or so to develop a wet line or a dry line in the wet track. And as we develop that line, we'll have to see how this rain holds up. We may see drivers start getting some warm tires, especially if they have not calculated their tire temperatures correctly. Could very easily see some quickly warming tires. But we will just have to wait and see. It will be chaos during this race, especially with all of the spray. When they come back across this line to start this race, those drivers at the back of the grid will not be able to see much, and they need to be very cautious heading into the awkward right-hander braking zone of turn 1, and it is just going to be an absolute traffic jam through the S's of turns 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. It will take a bit of time for the field to get lined out single file and everyone to assume their positions. Also, one thing that you'll see, a lot of weaving, a lot of drag in the brakes, especially with cold brakes coming off the line. It will be very imperative to hold that brake temperature, get it as high as possible on this formation lap, and also hope that you've got that set up correct. As I stated previously, brake ducts going to be one of the big tuning parts that we see used on these cars, closing those brake ducts, trying to retain whatever temperature that you can get on those long straights like the pit straight and the straight between Spoon Curve and 130R. You're going to see a lot of cooling as air comes through those brake ducts, but also you don't want to have those brake ducts too closed and not allow any air and then begin to overheat your tires and brakes. 3 seconds away as we actually are going to see rain weaning off towards the middle of this session, and we may very well see damp or dry conditions at the very end. We'll have to wait and see how that forecast continues to develop. But as of right now, lessening rain at the halfway point of this race. Wagner is, I believe, engine fired, or at least those drivers around him are. And we are about ready to get going here in this 1 hour race, the 7th round of the BM246W challenge, and we are now rolling off the line. For many drivers, and you could have said it with any of the cars that we have been driving this season, this is their first interaction with this car. Many not a fan of the BMW with the previous iteration, or just having never driven this specific car. And being the older chassis will have its own nuances and a little bit different wheelbase than the more modern M4 GT3 that the majority of BMW drivers currently run. Wagner leading the field to the line. We'll see what kind of inputs. We'll see, watch those legs. What you want to look for is dragging the brakes, and it does seem to be that Wagner is on the brakes currently. And just dragging them, trying to hold whatever temperature possible, build up that temperature as much as possible, but going slow here, especially with water coming up into those wheel wells. It will be cooling those brakes, especially not with them getting much real use hard braking into the braking zones. You will be hard pressed to retain that temperature on this formation lap. Looking behind, the spray, not too terrible, at least if you are at the front of the grid. Going further back to the back of the grid, and that spray becomes a bit more of an issue. And this is only in the formation lap. During the race, especially with drivers taking up more than one lane, occupying all parts of the track, especially with everyone closer up together, that spray will be very, very hard to deal with. As the field comes out of 200R. Wagner needing to defend this championship lead. That brown and yellow number 99 M6 GT3. And then you shift your focus to the number 45 of Lindbergh and the number 32 of Douglas. Douglas with more work to do than Lindbergh, but these two drivers are in need to win positions heading into the final part of this championship. Wagner in the lead, Douglas and Lindbergh both in P2 and 3 in the championship, split by half a point. Whoever finishes in front of the other will take the position. And currently, if Lindbergh finishes ahead of Douglas, I think Lindbergh would hold on to his current championship standing position. But they go 2 by 2, and we are ready to take the green flag. Shift our focus back to our leader, our pole sitter of Wagner. As we head into turn number 1, it could very well be chaos. Coming out of the Casio chicane and onto the pit straight, coming out of the final corner, the pit entrance on the right there, was we may see some drivers use that pit lane, some may not. And with the spray billowing behind, we will wait for those lights on screen to go green, and we will take the green flag in this race. Lined up 2 by 2 on those grid spots as they approach the start-finish line. And green, 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 we are racing, fighting for position behind 3 wide, 4 wide in some spots. And as they come into turn number 1, Vasquez will try it around the outside of Wagner. Everyone behind seems to have made it through nicely. We do have one car wide and to the right. It does seem to be, it may be the 87 of Rowan, and I believe it was down quite a few positions. Wagner holding on to that lead though, with Douglas, or Vasquez, I'm sorry, in P2 under attack from Horner, who has actually pushed Lindbergh down a position as they come through the Degners. Vasquez and Horner side by side through Degner 1. Do they hold it through Degner 2? Yes, they do. And Douglas, I believe that may be Douglas. That may be Lindbergh trying to scrape those positions together. Vasquez assumes a position ahead, but what has happened to Horner? Where has Horner gone? And Horner is around. I don't know if maybe he got 2 tires in the grass, but Horner has gone around and out of that fight. And Wagner currently running away with it. Vasquez will try to chase him down. The number 92 is Lindbergh, caught up in an incident very far down the order, as Douglas finds himself in P3 side by side with the number 92 of Joseph, though both Lindbergh and Horner involved in incidents, pushing them far down the order. The number 36 of Camber around at Spoon will try to get that vehicle righted. And Douglas goes deep into the Casio chicane, cuts through it. And I can only imagine those tires have lost some temperature in doing that. Mikey and Joseph fighting as they come across the line. Mikey trying to get a run on Joseph, and I think he will have one. Will eye the position to the inside. It's hard to go through here 2 by 2, and they make contact. Joseph goes around, I believe throws it into reverse, and the number 103 of Bird with a slide all the way around, unable to hold it out and re-enter the track. And we've got another spin behind as well. Does seem to be the 246 of Trotman Grant, who has to wait for the field to cycle through. Vasquez trying to chase down Wagner, but those two have broken free of the field. Douglas in a position to at least move up in position ahead of the championship contender of Lindbergh, who is far down the order with a lot of work to do trying to make it past the number 103 of Bird and the number 92 of Joseph. After being tapped in the rear by Mikey, will also try and make up a few positions. Side by side for Lindbergh and Bird into the hairpin. Does Lindbergh make it around the outside? I think he does. That may also be Bird allowing him to go back past, knowing that he is one of the quicker drivers. And Young just ahead as Joseph and Young fighting into turn number, I don't even remember. I'm getting confused with myself as I'm trying to figure out what's going on in the foreground and the background. Too much chaos all over the track. Does seem to be that Drain had a bit of an incident at Spoon Curve. As they come through 130R, Drain will slot in position ahead. And Joseph on a hard charging run trying to find a way past the teammate of Drain, the number 12 of Norman, as he made quick work of Young behind. Joseph trying to very quickly close those positions to those drivers up ahead. Vasquez currently with the fastest lap of the race and has very quickly closed up the gap between himself and Wagner. That gap was 1.9 seconds on the previous lap, now just 0.6 seconds. And does Vasquez have that much of a pace advantage, or has Wagner just made a mistake on that previous lap? And Wagner makes another mistake wide at Dunlop, and that is going to give Vasquez a run, and Vasquez will slot in just ahead as they come into Degner 1 and 2, and Wagner losing a lot of time, but Vasquez assumes the lead. What has happened to Douglas around on his own at Degner 2 does re-enter the track without really causing any issues to other drivers, but the 713 of Wilson finds himself in P4 and trying to take the P3 position, the final spot on the podium, away from Douglas. As Wilson, if you were here with us on Monday with Go Fast Racing, took home the win in AM. Wilson showing that he has got some pace in the wet. We've had an incident back behind number 103 of Bird into the pit lane. Also the number 87 of Rowan and the number 19 of Merkel all involved. I think it may have been a 3-car collision. Someone too late on the brakes. That is big damage on both of those race cars. And it may be into the pit lane for Merkel and Rowan. Vasquez holding on to the lead, and it looks like he will lead one lap, taking the lead away from Wagner at the Dunlop curve on that previous lap, and Vasquez will lead a lap with Wagner 1 second behind. Douglas still in P3 is also Lindbergh with more issues and into the pit lane. It must have been a big impact at 130R, and that is going to have big championship implications. But chaos is no stranger here in the wet at Suzuka. And we have seen it have many drivers be affected. Vasquez and Wagner fighting at the top of the field. And we have had a few drivers put those cars on the trailer and done for the night. But a fight for the lead here between Vasquez and Wagner, and it seems to be more so a war of attrition than strength, as it is who can outlast the other. We have seen multiple drivers give up positions just due to making a mistake on their own. Currently, the rain is not going to be ending by the time we get closer to the end. The rain will be lessening, but it is not going to be ending. We'll have to wait another 20 minutes or so to see the forecast to the end of the race. Currently, Vasquez taking the lead, still holds the fastest lap of the race, and will try to hold on to this lead to the end. There still is the question of strategy. Who is on what strategy? Or is there any strategy? Is it just loaded up full of fuel and try to nurse these tires the full hour in these wet conditions and hope that the track does not go dry? So I think that may be the number one strategy. Wagner deep into the Casio chicane, and that will grow the gap for Vasquez, allow him to take a breather. We'll see when they come across the line what the gap is looking like. 1.8 seconds, so it didn't grow too much. Mikey and Drain battling. Mikey having just gone past Drain in Sector 3. I think that move may have happened at 130R, and Drain going around. I think he made contact with Horner, and Heiderstadt just snuck through there. Swerving, I think, trying to avoid the number 3 of Drain, who was around. Bird, not Bird, that is the number 19 of Merkel out of the pit lane, making those repairs, getting back onto the racetrack. And is Wagner starting to make some mistakes, push a little too hard and drop back? Gap has grown another half second within the last sector. And is Vasquez able to maybe let off the throttle a little bit, not push quite as hard? Just have to wait and see. Wilson still trying to chase down Douglas. Douglas in a must-finish position. Has made one mistake and has opened up the gap to the two leaders, but still sits P3 still in a nice point scoring position and is in a position to lock in the P2 position in the championship and have a better point standing heading into the final 2 rounds of this championship, especially with Vasquez at the moment denying Wagner the victory, as Wagner seems to be prone to some rare mistakes. Very unusual to see Wagner make mistakes, but one small mistake has led to a few more, and currently Vasquez leads by 2.5 seconds. I say 2.5 seconds as Wagner shaved half a second of that gap off at the previous sector. Still Wagner with some work to do. Douglas trying to hold off Wilson, and Joseph in the number 92, who had gone around earlier, trying to close the gap to those 2 drivers ahead, fighting for the final spot on the podium. Joseph with a bit of a wild situation heading into turn 1. Entered at a not perfectly straight angle. I saw some counter steer trying to hold that car straight, but did manage to regain control. And honestly made it seem like it wasn't hardly a mistake at all. Definitely seems to be using some slip angle coming around Dunlop. Drain and Young, as Young has damage, and I think Drain will try and find a way past number 23 of Young. Heiderstadt with work to do, needs to catch up to Atwell, as Atwell is currently in the lead in the Holy Grail champion, or in the Holy Grail class of this race. I don't believe that Atwell is in the lead for the championship, but is currently leading in the Holy Grail tonight here at Suzuka. And 3 drivers behind fighting for position. Norman getting a little squirrely coming into Spoon Curve and not able to slow that car down enough, as they are side by side just behind. Mikey and Horner. Horner with a bit of a slip coming out of Spoon Curve, but they are side by side on the run up to 130R. Mikey does have some of the slipstream, then that slipstream favor goes back towards Horner, but they will stay side by side as Mikey slots in ahead, and Horner just trying to find whatever grip he could on the inside. Had no choice but to go to the inside, and these 3 are having a battle. Let's go on board with Horner chasing. That spray, not as big of an issue as it would have been at the very beginning of this race with all of those drivers clumped up together. But Mikey and Norman seemingly battling into turn 1, but Mikey ended up backing out of it. And Norman, I think, going defensive, moved off of the racing line slightly and caused a bit of a backup with both Mikey and Norman, bringing Horner right back into this fight. And both Mikey and Horner continuing on with the turn signal, making that BMW joke, saying yes, they do work. Mikey with a poor run through Dunlop. Is that going to open the door for Horner into Degner 1? Actually it is, but not in the way that Horner was thinking. A mistake from Mikey, and I think a mistake from Norman as well, going wide at Degner 2. Not much of a mistake though, and it looked like Horner may have tried to send it into the hairpin, and a bit of a bump between, and Horner may have a run into 200R. Side by side and trying to find whatever grip he can. Will need to outbrake Norman at Spoon, and I think Norman may let him have it. Yes, he does. Will will not necessarily let him have it, is trying to fight that position back, but is unable to hold on to it, and Horner will go up ahead of Norman and Mikey. And Norman, getting a poor run out of Spoon, will leave him victim to Mikey just behind. And Horner will now try to push forward and press the issue onto Atwell and take P6 overall. Mikey trying to get a better run out of the final corner. We'll have the slipstream onto the pit straight. We'll see if Mikey has enough of a run into turn one. Looks for the move, but is nowhere close enough. And we'll have to just continue chasing Norman, as Norman has caught up to Horner though. And Norman, I think, trying to give a response to Horner, get that position back. Horner will also have to try and find a way past the number 66 of Atwell, the current Holy Grail leader. As these four all running together will try to fight for whatever positions they can get. Up ahead, Douglas still in P3 with Wilson still in tow, and Joseph has closed up on that fight. We'll see if Joseph has enough pace to try and find a way past. And Douglas definitely feeling the pressure. The gap has grown as Granados makes a mistake at turn one, goes wide. Does re-enter the track, and the number 103 of Bird with another mistake, and it seems that may be damage. That is damage on that BMW M6. And I think he may try to get it refired and into the pit lane. Does not. Does an automatic pit lane entry. Vasquez. Wagner still applying pressure, but Vasquez growing that gap, and it looks like it's going to expand to 3 seconds when they come across the line here, unless Wagner has closed up that gap a little bit. Just barely by 1,000th, that gap does reach 3 seconds. And this trio fighting for the final spot on the podium, Douglas, Wilson, and Joseph, still running along together. Horner has found a way past Atwell, as I made a little misclick. Sorry about that. We are back in. Douglas, Wilson, and Joseph all together, but Atwell may have made a mistake or is allowing the traffic to go through, as Atwell doesn't really have a race to be or doesn't want his race to be ruined right now with any miscommunication between traffic. Through the S's, I think Atwell may have just let Horner and Mikey by. But where Horner went by, he has definitely gained an advantage on Mikey by a couple seconds. Wilson, or Douglas, with Wilson and Joseph closing up. And the gap is just growing and growing between Douglas and Wagner. I don't think, unless something crazy happens, Douglas is going to be in any position to press the envelope for the win in this race. Again, unless something crazy happens. Has Wagner made a mistake, as that gap has grown to 4.3 seconds now on this lap, as we are a third of the way through this race. And a very slow exit of the chicane, the Casio chicane, just before the final corner. And how does this gap grow? 4.6, it does grow another 0.3. Joseph now dropping back from this fight for P3. And Horner Continues holding on to P6 with Mikey and Norman in tow. We have had a few retirements in this race due to some inevitable damage on these cars. They still have a long way to go. We still have yet to see anyone come into the pit lane on a strategy call. I think everyone will just be trying to take these cars all the way to the end. And who has jumped into this fight that actually does seem to be the number 3 of Drain? That is actually out of order and is currently down a lap, I believe. A big slide and off and into the wall, a hard impact into the wall for Drain. Coming into Degner 1 out of the Dunlop curve. And what has happened to Horner? Horner is around. I think Horner may have also made a mistake at the Dunlop curve. Horner dropped down to P9, just ahead of Heiderstadt. And when it seemed that Horner was in a position to try and run away, it all just dissolves. Mikey now up to P6 with Norman, P7 Atwell, P8, and Atwell still in the lead in the Holy Grail. And just like that, a position that you may have thought is pretty concrete and absolute is gone from one mistake. Wagner, I think, making some more mistakes as that gap has grown 6.2 seconds. Is there a climax that Vasquez is pushing towards, or is Wagner trying to be more conservative with the car? Slide, big slide around turn 1. And are we starting to see some degradation in those wet tires? Or is lessening rain going to become a factor, and are we going to maybe see some overheating of these tires? More incidents. The number 12 of Norman, parked up the hill just before 130 yard, does get that car refired. And the number 246 I thought I saw also stopped at Degner 2. Douglas with Wilson and Joseph still in tow. This battle has been going on since the beginning of this race. Did Wilson have a bit of a slide? Are we starting to see a loss of grip from these drivers? As we are seeing more and more incidents, and these are not incidents, as an incident with Atwell. Atwell around at turn 1. Relinquishes the Holy Grail lead to, I believe, the championship leading Heiderstadt. And Atwell with damage on the front of that car as this field is dropping in number as we have just had more and more incidents. And once that car takes some damage, becomes harder to drive, it is even harder to keep it together. Norman with another incident at the S's. Turned around, does get that car righted and back on the course. And Vasquez and Wagner, the battle of attrition up at the front. As we are starting to see some mistakes, it does seem to be that the moisture on the track is beginning to lessen. And Wagner, are we starting to see, are they trying to find moisture on the track? We still see a good bit of spray, which means that there shouldn't be any lack of moisture overheating of the tires. Let's go on board with Wagner, look at steering input. The previous round, I noted, or particularly noted, Wagner's smooth steering input. Definitely seems to be a lack of grip, trying to find grip in those tires. The same thing for Vasquez, a bit of a slip from the rear coming into Dunlop. Are we seeing less push, a lot of counter steer from Vasquez there? And And are we seeing degradation in the handling of the cars, or are we just seeing mistakes begin to happen? I mean, it is already tricky conditions on its own, but we are seeing a lot more counter steer, a lot more drivers going around on their own. And into the hairpin. Wilson still trying to find a way past Douglas. These two have been going at it the entirety of this race. Joseph has been dropped back off of that battle slightly. Vasquez just does not need to make a mistake, is closing up on some traffic. Coming around 130R, we still see them using quite a bit more curb than I would expect to see used here in the wet. But if it's what brings the time, it's what brings the time. And is that a pit lane entrance for Camber? Yes, it is our first pit lane entrance. Is this a pit lane entry on strategy? Or is he coming in to repair damage? Does he need fuel? Number 103 of Bird around again with more damage. And the rain continues to fall, but the rain is lessening. Coming through the S's. Vasquez still leading, but the gap to Wagner has grown. 8.5 seconds now. Wagner and Vasquez just continuing to fight, but Vasquez pulling further and further away, now out of view of Wagner, at least through the twisty, turny sections from the S's all the way through Spoon Curve. Vasquez just out of view of Wagner. This battle between Douglas and Wilson continues on. Are we seeing wet tires begin to degrade? Or is it, as Douglas gets thrown off of that curve at Degner 2? The rain is lessening, but the rain will not be ending. We will have rain all the way to the end of this race. That wet line is prominent. Wish I had a way to see what kind of temperatures the drivers are looking at. Wilson has now dropped off quite significantly from Douglas. Half a second between this Spoon Curve and the previous chicane. Douglas almost gone around Joseph, sliding all the way through. All three of these drivers sliding, four-wheel slides. Through Spoon Curve. As they come into 130R, are they trying to break the toe, or are they looking for moisture? Are they beginning to have these wet tires start to warm? Number 87 of Rowan, and that's big damage. That is going to be into the pit lane for Rowan for sure. Leader of Vasquez making his way through some traffic. The number 246 of Trotman Grant next on the block for Vasquez to make his way past. 9.7 seconds now, the gap to the pole sitter, currently P2 of Wagner. And is Wagner beginning to maybe drop back towards Douglas as we are halfway through this race? Douglas still just trying to hold on to whatever pace he can muster, as he has not let the pressure push into a breaking point. Wilson has gotten very, very close. But Wilson now with pressure from Joseph behind. Is Joseph going to be the one to spring the move on Wilson? Wilson a bit of a maestro in the wet though, as he has seen success in other leagues in the wet. And a big moment looking at that front, or at the front wheels movement, trying to fish for whatever grip he could coming out of Degner 1 into Degner 2. And around the hairpin, Wilson seems to have gotten a big run on Douglas, bringing Joseph along with him in that fight. They come down 200R into Spoon Curve. Once again, we have seen Spoon Curve be a big incident space. As they come through Spoon, Douglas makes a mistake. Wilson will have a run out of Spoon, but too eager on the throttle and will actually get a slide of the rear coming out of Spoon, and that will open up that gap back to Douglas. Douglas lives to see another day, and Wilson now going to be under attack from Joseph behind. As they come through 130R, pushing. Joseph very, very wide through 130R. Surprised that he had any grip out there, especially on that painted tarmac. Does manage to hold on to the car for the time being. And Douglas with a big moment coming through the final corner. Is that going to allow Wilson to get a run? Wilson desperately trying to break the toe of Joseph behind as they come into turn 1 yet again. Wilson very wide, but Douglas has made a mistake around on his own. And Douglas relinquishes P3 down to P5. Still a good point scoring position, but cannot afford another mistake like that. Now Wilson finds himself P3. Wilson and Joseph fighting for that final spot on the podium. Joseph with a big slide around the S's as they come up the hill into Dunlop Curve. Watching the steering wheel, Wilson seems to have made a mistake. 2 tires on the grass. And they're going to be side by side into Degner 1 and 2. Joseph finds a way around the outside and will take the final spot on the podium, P3, with 28 minutes left in this race. They do have a car around up ahead, though. It does seem to be the number 35 of Granados. And Wagner with some traffic to try and navigate through. That gap is opening up, and it seems to be a bit of a slide out of Spoon as well. Both Vasquez and Wagner not making any mistakes. Same cannot be said for Douglas, but Wilson, with work to do, needs to try and chase down, or not, same cannot be said for Douglas. Wilson trying to chase down Joseph. Douglas still stays in P5. We'll have to try and wrangle those two ahead back down. Norman into the pit lane. Is this a scheduled stop, or is that damage on that BMW? It does seem to be wing damage, and I think that is going to need to be repaired. Is it wing damage, or am I looking at it wrong? It does seem to be a lot of rear end damage, and I think that wing is not standing up straight. Rowan does not need to come in, though. Still staying out, especially with that damage. And Granados around again ahead of the battle for P3. As it seems to be one mistake is a catalyst for more mistakes. And these three continue on. But mistakes galore, especially in these very treacherous conditions, and it will not dry up, but we may see rain lessening. And I think we may be starting to see less rain, less moisture on the track. And that could be one of the causes for the changes in driving that we have seen. Heiderstadt around at turn 1. It does not give the lead back to Atwell, but Atwell is not far behind that brown and yellow car, just in the background of that previous shot. And Heiderstadt seeming to be struggling to find grip in that M6 GT3. We'll have to see how this affects this battle for the lead in the Holy Grail division. Vasquez still leading, and with a lot of pressure off of his back, does not have to push anywhere near as hard. 11.2 seconds gap to Wagner. Wagner with a slow run through the Casio chicane. Joseph P3 and leaving Wilson behind, as I think Joseph just needed some room to break free, and now has a long way to go from P3 to P2. But we have seen mistakes be very abundant here, and really only one mistake away from P2 or possibly even the lead should Wagner or Vasquez make a catastrophic mistake. Granados around again, still trying, as Norman, I think, went deep into Spoon, almost made contact with Granados there. But Vasquez still just trying to keep it together, keep it in one piece, and just bring it home. Doesn't have any pressure, just needs to bring this car home. Atwell with some damage on that M6. Across the line, still a large gap to Heiderstadt up ahead. And what has happened there? I think that was the number 19 of Merkel, who went 2 tires in the grass. Not sure of exactly why. And Rowan into the pit lane now. I think he may have made another mistake. Currently, Vasquez's race to lose has the fastest lap, was good enough for P2, and was the only driver of many able to put a comparable lap up to Wagner. And seemingly it was good enough to take the lead, good enough to hold on to it, just needs to finish in this lead. Wagner would still be leading in this championship if he finishes where he does now, and I don't think any finish tonight would close up the gap enough to cause a change in the lead. But Lindbergh's issues earlier and retirement are definitely going to be a dampener on Lindbergh's championship hopes. Was just half a point away from Douglas in their fight for P2 and P3 in the championship. But Douglas will secure P2 in that championship ahead of Lindbergh. Heiderstadt and Atwell, as Heiderstadt seemingly making more mistakes as Atwell is right behind. We may very well have a battle for the Holy Grail lead, as I think Heiderstadt may have gone deep into Spoon, as Norman has just now, but Atwell not far behind Heiderstadt. And these two have been the slugfest in this Holy Grail division. We'll see if Atwell brings a fight to Heiderstadt. A big slide out of the final chicane. And I think that may give Atwell a run on Heiderstadt as they come onto the pit straight. That gap is less than a second now. This is the battle for the Holy Grail lead. P8 and P9 overall, and Heiderstadt with pressure on his back now just needs to try and wrangle this car back together, bring whatever grip he can find deep into turn 1 of the S's. And a little bit of a slide through the S's. Atwell does make the same mistake though. And I think Atwell is going to have a hard time trying to find a way past Heiderstadt, unless Heiderstadt makes a mistake, 2 tires in the grass. As we have seen a lot of mistakes come from the Dunlop curve. Misses that apex of Degner 1. What about Degner 2? A big slide, and is Heiderstadt going to go around? No, holds on to it, but Atwell is right there. It has that pressure surmounted on Heiderstadt. Very defensive into the hairpin. Is Atwell going to be able to get a better run out of the hairpin? This battle between these two is well on for sure. The number 19 of Merkel, who was just behind these two, has actually gone around at Degner 2. and into Spoon curve. Heiderstadt needs to keep it in one piece. We have seen some big slides from the rear trying to put the power down coming out of the Spoon curve. And all the way 4 tires onto those curves. Very, very risky here in the wet, but does manage to hold on to it. And they run up the hill towards 130R. Heiderstadt seemingly regaining control of this car, especially with the pressure applied by Atwell behind. And that gap between Vasquez and Wagner is just growing, growing, and growing. I think Heiderstadt went slightly deep and a bit of a slide coming through the final corner, trying to go full throttle, flat out, all the way down that downhill right-hander. But Atwell is close, closer than he has ever been. And Atwell relinquished the Holy Grail lead earlier. Heiderstadt with a big mistake slides into turn 1. Is that going to give Atwell back the lead? I think it is. And Atwell resumes the lead, but Heiderstadt right behind. And anything cannot be guaranteed. Nothing can be guaranteed in this race. We have seen mistakes all the way through the grid. But a mistake from Heiderstadt gives back the Holy Grail lead to Atwell. As they come out of Dunlop curb into Degner 1. Does Heiderstadt make another mistake into the grass for Heiderstadt? And I think he has had, a complete loss of grip in that car. Performance seems to have fallen off, and I think we may have much less moisture on the track than we saw previously. Still getting a bit of spray. That dry line is still prominent. Seemingly a lot of issues trying to find grip, especially in places where grip seemingly was abundant earlier. Into Spoon curve. Heiderstadt, as Atwell makes a mistake, Heiderstadt retakes the position. Is Atwell going to have a better run out of Spoon, though, as they are back and forth for this Holy Grail lead? And nothing is absolute in this race at all. Within a lap, Heiderstadt takes the Holy Grail lead back, clattering over the curves into 130R. Somehow holds on to that lead. And it seemed to be that Heiderstadt went deep into the Casio chicane again, but did not. Now they run 1 and 2 in the Holy Grail to turn number 1. Atwell needs to try and find a way past. Heiderstadt needs to not make the same mistake that he made on the prior lap. Survives through turn 1, but we have seen a lot of trouble trying to find and hold grip through the S's. Does Atwell have an advantage as they come through the S's? Vasquez still holding on to that lead. And has Wagner made a big mistake? And have we seen some utter, destruction of the tires? Joseph was 12 seconds, has slashed over 5 seconds off of that gap between Joseph and Wagner. And if Wagner continues to make mistakes, or if Joseph just continues to have superior pace to Wagner, we could see Joseph get close enough to take that number 2 position away from Wagner. Back onto the Holy Grail fight for the lead. These two coming through 200R into Spoon. We have seen a lot of mistakes made here at Spoon, but they both seem to have it nice and tidy. Heiderstadt going very safe at the exit of Spoon. Did not want to spin those tires, kick that rear end around, as that gives you a very, very poor run out of the Spoon curve. And through 130R, Heiderstadt a lot wider than previous, and I think Heiderstadt has regained some confidence in that car and has grown that lead. And a more aggressive run through the final chicane as they come onto the pit straight. I think that gap has grown 1.3 seconds as they come across the line. What are we looking at now? Still 1.3 seconds. And Heiderstadt onto the curb. That is not going to be the line that you are going to want to take through turn one, and is that going to close that battle for the lead right back up? Especially as Heiderstadt gets a poor run into the S's. If Atwell gets a better run, he will quickly close that gap up, but I think Atwell got just as poor of a run through the S's. And this is just going to go one way or the other. Or you can say it's gone one way and the other, as the mistakes have not been solely made by one driver. It seems to be that they come in quick succession as Heiderstadt almost loses it. Atwell goes very wide at Degner too as well. And up into the hairpin. Heiderstadt very wide. And it seems to be these wet tires are struggling for grip. So we'll go on board with Vasquez, looking at that steering wheel, especially coming through Dunlop. Smooth inputs again. Vasquez has no reason to be pushing here. Does have traffic up ahead, but Vasquez no pressure at all whatsoever. Joseph has knocked a second out of that gap. 5.9 seconds now the gap to Wagner up ahead. 5.7 seconds now as that gap is dropping sector to sector, and Joseph seems to have some pace to push in this car. Has he saved the pace, saved the tires for the end of this race? As Wagner is well within sight. And does Wagner just not have much car left? We are seeing more slip, more slide from these BMWs, especially as this rain gets less and less. The track is still wet, still kicking up plenty of spray, but there does not seem to be anywhere near as much moisture as we had earlier. Joseph, if he can get a great run out of Spoon here, it's going to be a very wide run. As they come through this next sector, what are we looking at from Douglas? 4.7 seconds the gap now. It has dropped another second. That gap, Joseph with a big slide through 130R though, does manage to hold on to it, hard braking into the Casio chicane. 4.7 seconds was the gap at the previous sector as they come across the start-finish line. What will it be? Is it continuing to drop? As that gap between these two is much, much closer than it was, albeit 5 minutes ago. 4.8 seconds the gap. Wilson with Douglas actually quite a ways behind, does have the traffic car of Camber between the two. Wilson with a big slide through turn one though, getting onto that curb, kicking the rear end out, does manage to hold on to it. Heiderstadt and Atwell continuing to fight. Heiderstadt trying to find whatever pace he can, but does seem to be struggling for grip through Spoon Curve. I hope everyone has enough fuel left in the car. Vasquez almost a 20-second lead to Wagner. Joseph 4.7 seconds still the gap behind Wagner. But this battle for the Holy Grail, 1.5 seconds. And a bit of a blip of the throttle from Atwell. I think Atwell may have gotten a very poor exit or a very poor run through that chicane. And that gap is going to grow. Just watching it on the minimap, that gap has actually grown quite a lot. 1.8 seconds the gap now. Vasquez still with traffic. That gap does not matter much if either of these drivers makes a mistake. That would likely afford the lead to the other, as they are close enough to each other. If Atwell goes around, that would allow Heiderstadt some breathing room. If Heiderstadt goes around, that is surely going to give the lead back to Atwell. And just making sure that you do not make any mistakes is going to be #1 priority for both of these drivers fighting for this Holy Grail lead. Gap seems to have stabilized between Wagner and Joseph. 4.8 seconds for an entire lap. So I think that gap will hold. Yes, continues to hold. 4.8 seconds, continues on. Joseph currently P3 is trying to find a way to get that P2 position away. 4 wheels on the curb. I did begin to initiate a rotation of the rear end around, but Joseph was able to hold on to it and continues to run through the S's. 2.1 seconds now the gap, or at least was the gap between Heiderstadt and Atwell, but I think that gap has once again dropped, as we are less than 9 minutes away from the checkered flag. Vasquez in a very comfortable lead, as he has been for the majority of this race. And as they come into the Casio chicane, Heiderstadt just needs to hold on to the gap that he has built so far. And I think, once again, that gap has stabilized. 2.1 seconds the gap currently. Will it drop at all, or will it grow? It does grow by about 1/4 of a second, 2.3. Now the gap, but still, one mistake from either driver can very quickly cause a change in this lead. Drain with some big damage on the front of that M6. Just making it past the number 19, or actually just in battle with the number 19 of Merkel. Wagner in P2, still trying to, well, I guess you could say he's still trying to chase down Vasquez. Vasquez is long gone, unless Vasquez makes some sort of catastrophic mistake at the very end of this race. I do not want to impose the commentator's curse onto Vasquez, but that is going to be the only way that we have a change of lead in this race. And that gap has stagnated between Joseph and Wagner at 4.8 seconds. I don't think it is going to drop too much unless Wagner has some issues trying to get past traffic. No, the number 35 of Granados cooperates nicely and does allow the 99 of Wagner to go past. Number 36 of Camber has gone around at turn number 1 and into the pit lane for Camber. This race has been all about this man. Wagner was able to put it up on pole, but a mistake at the Dunlop curve opened the door for Vasquez to find a way past, and ever since that move was made, there has been no contest for Vasquez. And just 3 laps away from bringing this race home and securing a victory in the BM246W Challenge. Taking a win away from Wagner, though, Douglas is still going to score some good points in P5, and Wagner will still hold on to this championship lead. Douglas, with the absence of Lindbergh in this session, will move up to P2. And we'll have P2 secured heading into the penultimate round next week in this series, hopefully in the dry. Joseph has closed that gap down some more, 4.2 seconds now. And still one mistake away from a swap of position is Wagner. Just a couple laps left to go in this race. And I think Heiderstadt may have secured the lead, as Atwell has now dropped back a few seconds. Heiderstadt able to back off of the pressure, not drive so aggressively, and should be able to just bring it home. Nice and easy for Heiderstadt. Has built a gap to Atwell, and I think Atwell just got a very, very poor exit out of the spoon curve. And this battle that has been going on the entire race is Douglas very much struggling for grip around Dunlop curve. Has Wilson just behind. This is a battle for position. This is the battle for P4, and Wilson with a big slide out of Degner too. Does manage to hold on to it. And grip does seem to be hard to come by now. There is still some moisture on the track. The racing line seems to really just be a suggestion for the majority of the field. Douglas, 2 tires on the curb. Wilson does not go anywhere near that curb. Does Wilson get a good run out of Spoon up the hill? Wait, when they cross the timing line. No, Wilson actually got a poorer run through there than Douglas. Maybe that is just not Wilson's strongest part of the track. Vasquez with 1 to go. This next lap will be the last lap. So just needs to cross that finish line 2 more times to secure the win here in round 7 of this BM246W challenge. And albeit a very chaotic start to the final, 3rd and final part of this multi-class spec series. Bit of an odd way to say it. Started out with the M2 TCX car, 3 rounds in it, and then we moved on to the M4 GT4, now in the M6 GT3, this being the first round of the M6. We do have 2 more rounds after this race tonight. The gap between Wagner and Joseph has grown yet again. But Douglas and Wilson, have they come together? I think they have. Wilson going slowly, and Mikey will take a position back. I think Wilson, not sure exactly what happened there, but Wilson up into P4. I don't know if Wilson is going slow to give the position back or if it's just a bit of an optical illusion. But Wilson up into P4, Mikey P5, Douglas down to P6. Out of the final corner, Vasquez will cross the line to start the final lap of this race. Just needs to make it around 1 more time to secure the win tonight. Vasquez, who has not had the best luck in this series between the M2 and the M6, comes into his element here between the M2 and the M4, comes into his element here in the M6. As I think Wilson has, or is, relinquishing the position back to Douglas and will live to fight that position another day. The story of the day has been about this man who almost made a mistake into Dunlop. Had to give some counter steer to not go around, but no reason to push. Just a cruise from here to the end for Vasquez. As the time comes down to 0. And Vasquez with just a few more corners to go to lock in a win here in the M6 GT3. Make sure you don't go anywhere when the race is over, as I do raid a streamer, usually someone with 1 to 2 viewers or no viewers, as we try to share the love with the views and continue to bring up other people in the sim racing scene. Typically try to find somebody who is on a Assetto Corsa Competizione. Once again, thank you for all of those who have tuned in or will be watching the race post-race, either tonight or in the morning. Through 130R and into the chicane for the final time. And just one more corner to go. Vasquez will take the win in round 7, the first round of the M6 GT3s. And it is an easy victory for Vasquez. And stopping at the line. A bit of a show off there from Vasquez, and doing some donuts in front of traffic that is trying to finish their race. But a bit of a Verstappen cocky celebration, who I believe he was fined the last time that he did that. I believe it was in Austria, possibly in 2020 or 2021, stopping at the start-finish line and spinning the tires across the line. But we get a bit of a replication of that from Vasquez there, with enough of a gap to stop and celebrate. Joseph takes home P3 in their first race back. And Heiderstadt, with Atwell behind, cannot afford to make a mistake, as this still is battle for the Holy Grail lead, as Heiderstadt does go deep at Spoon. Just needs to keep it together for 3 more corners. 130R, Casio chicane, and the final corner onto the pit straight. But I think Heiderstadt will do it. Just the chicane and the final corner to go for Heiderstadt. And no reason to push out of the final corner. Heiderstadt will take the checkered flag and take the win in the Holy Grail Series, as I believe that will allow Heiderstadt to expand his championship lead. Atwell takes P2. Trotman Grant takes P3. Vasquez P1, Wagner P2, Joseph P3, Mikey P4, Douglas P5, Wilson P6, Horner P7, Heiderstadt P8, Atwell P9, Young P10, Trotman Grant P11, Merkel P12, Drain P13, Norman P14, Granados P15, Camber P16, and a few more retirements past that. Wilson, sorry, that's in silver. Heiderstadt takes the win in the Holy Grail, with Atwell P2, Trotman Grant P3, Granados P4, and Camber P5. If you are not following, please consider following the Twitch, consider subscribing to the Twitch channel, and consider subscribing to the YouTube channel. Vasquez taking the win there. And stick around with us just a moment. We will raid somebody. We will see you next week for the penultimate round of this BM246W Challenge Series. As let's find someone to stream, or someone to raid. Let's go with Precision Ket, who has no viewers. They have been live for a while. And Saba someone that I actually recognize, as this may be a console league. Saba, a driver that we have raced with here in TRC. But we'll go ahead and give Precision Ket a raid. Thank you all for tuning in tonight, and I will see you all next week.